Hello, you guys. Paul Lutheran here, your ordinary Lutheran North Country guy. And we are here to get wisdom, eh? And we are on Proverbs 5 today. So we're going to talk about that book, that part of the book today. And this is a chapter that's all about hanky-panky. And the basic message is don't. Now, unless it's your spouse, and then it's not really hanky-panky, you see. And so it's a warning against adultery, but not just a warning. In fact, most of the part I'm going to read for you is about something else. That it's there's when God says no, God is usually saying yes to in some way. And so the I know that it happens a lot. We've been hearing it on the news that you have a man who's on the prowl and the woman becomes his victim. It can also happen the other way, that a woman is on the prowl and the man becomes the victim. And for some reasons, in Proverbs, it's the second way that they tell the story. It might have something to do with who the original audience was. For lots of young men that they were trying to instruct in the palace, and they said, so sons, listen to this. But we need to all hear the warning, and we need to all hear the invitation, because I think that not everybody I know that's listening is married, but there's a message in there for all of us in terms of God's invitation to enjoy the things that God says yes to. Because whenever God says no, God is saying yes in some way too. So, as I said, the chapter is about hanky-panky, and the message is don't. And so the first part is this big warning, don't get caught up in this. But then it comes in a different direction. And it says this. Are you ready? I hope you are. Drink water from your own cistern, flowing water from your own well. Should your springs be scattered abroad, streams of water in your streets, let them be for yourself alone and not for sharing with strangers. Let your fountain be blessed and rejoice in the wife of your youth, a lovely, dear, a graceful doe. May her breasts satisfy you at all times. May you be intoxicated always by her love. Those of you that maybe haven't read the Bible very much, did you know there were things like that here? You read the Song of Solomon, you get even more. And it goes on. Why should you be intoxicated, my son, by another woman, and embrace the bosom of an adulteress? For human ways are under the eyes of the Lord, and he examines their paths. And the iniquities of the wicked ensnare them, and they are caught in the toils of their sin. They die for lack of discipline, and because of their great folly, they are lost. So it gets back to the warning things. But right there, there's this verse, rejoice in the wife of your youth, yet her breasts satisfy you at all times. And so rejoice and be intoxicated at the right time and in the right way. And I want to tell you a little bit about my Uncle Elmer. I told you in another one of our times that Uncle Elmer was one of these people that was a smart guy who did some stupid things. And there were a lot of different kinds of things like that, but here's part of his story, okay? And it's not all his fault, okay? But some of it, for sure. So Uncle Elmer married Aunt Ethel, and she was a good woman. Her children all thought so, and all of us nephews and nieces, we thought so too. And she was a pretty woman. I mean, I'm her nephew, so I don't pay attention in quite the same way. But she was, anyway. So I uh, they were married, and Uncle Elmer, this is another part of the story, but it kind of plays into it. He he had this big idea for the big house that they were going to have, all to his specifications. He had all the things that he wanted to have there. He could have had a perfectly good house for his family for, I don't know the numbers, but I bet 30, 40,000 less dollars. But he had a pretty good job, and he thought, we can do this. It would skimp a little bit, and he wanted to have that house. So they had the house. Now, I told you that Aunt Ethel was a good woman and a good looking woman, but she also could be moody, owly even sometimes. And for all I know, sometimes when none of us else, the rest of us were listening, maybe it was even worse. And I got to thinking later what really happened. Well, I bet she was depressed. I even asked Uncle Elmer about that late in life because it was an interesting thing. Even late in life, after they had been, I'm getting ahead of the story, but they had been separated, they had been divorced for a few decades, he could look back and say, what a good woman she was. And I said, do you think that she was depressed when he was telling some of this story? And he says, yeah, I think she was. I said, did you ever say she should go to a counselor or see if a doctor could give some medicine that would help or something like that? And he said, well, we had all that money to pay for the mortgage. We couldn't afford that. Oh dear, what a problem. Yeah, it's one thing if it's you just can't afford, but if you can't afford because you got something you didn't even need. So that's part of the story too, I think. But anyway, Uncle Elmer got kind of glum about Aunt Ethel. And there was this other person that came along that later on we were told to call Auntie Annie because she ended up marrying Uncle Elmer, who left Ethel for her. And I thought Aunt Anne would be just fine, but she wanted to be Auntie Annie, so that's how it was. So now she had these enormous eyelashes that she would bat, and there's something in the book of Proverbs about a woman capturing you with her eyelashes, I think, somewhere. And I think that's what Auntie Annie did all right, even though we thought they looked kind of funny because they were, I think, false. And she batted them so much. But she was a pretty woman too. So, and she was a good woman too in a lot of ways. But so Uncle Elmer left Aunt Ethel for Auntie Annie. And in the divorce court, the judge wasn't very impressed with Uncle Elmer because he could see that what he was doing, he was just kind of trading one in for the other or whatever they say. And anyway, here's what I think he should have done. I think he should have read this verse. May her breasts satisfy you at all times. Now, as I say, I was her nephew, so but she had pretty good. Never mind. I think he should, and it would have helped, and not just that, but all the things about her that were good. So now there's something about this that's like real life, all of life. You remember the story of Adam and Eve in the garden? And they were there, and if you ask somebody what God told them about what they could and couldn't do in the garden, I think most people would say, well, God said, don't eat that tree in the middle of the garden with the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. And that's not wrong. But if you read it carefully, the first thing God says isn't that. The first thing God says is, you may eat of all the trees, of all the fruit of all the trees, except that one. So God is saying, here, all of it, all this good stuff for you. Enjoy it, have a good time. But all they could think about is what they couldn't do. At least that must have been part of it. And you know the story, that everything went down the tubes. because they because they didn't look at all the good things God had given them. And there are so many times in our lives when we get so caught up in all the things that we think we don't have. And we think God is holding out on us and that we're not getting everything that we ought to have. And so then we start looking to solve, to get things. We want to solve, God wants to bless us, but we want to get the blessing in our way. And it doesn't always turn out well. Well, it never does if it makes us turn away from God. Never. So back to Uncle Elmer. So then, because at least for part of the thing, that he didn't pay enough attention to the good things about Aunt Ethel. And as I say, I think he should have spent more time reading that or paying attention to that verse. I know there's some guy out there that's saying, "Oh, I like that verse. I think I'm going to make that my life verse." Well, okay with you if you do, like your life verse, okay. But anyway, it turned out the way that it did. And then with Auntie Annie, I think the same thing happened. He started noticing the things that he didn't like, and he started not noticing the things that he did like. It was at least part of the story. So we can learn from this passage, first of all, those of us who are married, to pay attention to the things that are good with the person that we're with. And then those of us that aren't married, to also learn from this that God gives good gifts. So pay attention to God's good gifts and rejoice in them. And when you can rejoice in God's good gifts, that's one thing that keeps us away from temptation. Because if we're noticing all these good things that God is doing for us, then we don't have to go running off somewhere else and try to get the blessing in our own way, which doesn't work. So I guess that's what I have to say about Proverbs chapter 5. And I think I'm going to go get a good glass of cool water instead of some good Lutheran coffee this time. So you have a good day now and get wisdom, eh? And we'll see you with Proverbs chapter 6 next time. Good. There it is.